Most people would have turned away, but not James Thompson. The Yorkshire Horse Rescue Centre was bustling that grey afternoon. Hopeful families and seasoned breeders moving from pen to pen, boots squelching through the thick mud, voices bright with anticipation. Yet James wasn't here for joy, or even nostalgia. He'd come looking for something to save, something as battered as himself. He paused by the last paddock, rain dripping off the brim of his cap. There, shivering in the corner, was a horse that looked more ghost than flesh. Gaunt, patchy, coat muddy and scarred. Valor. The rescue staff called him a hard case, ex-racehorse, probably abused, surely neglected. Most visitors took one look and moved on, muttering under their breath. But Valor's dark eyes, haunted, alert, met James's stare and didn't flinch. James reached out a slow, steady hand, careful not to startle. "You remind me of someone," he whispered, a line of memory snaking through his chest. Suddenly he was back in Texas, at the VA hospital Shadow, the gentle mare that had pulled him out of darkness after Afghanistan, nudging his trembling shoulder through panic attacks and sleepless nights. Shadow was gone now, the loss still a raw, empty ache inside. He'd sworn never to open that door again. But here, in the Yorkshire drizzle, James felt it creak open, just a crack. A clatter at the gate broke the moment. Other adopters eyed Valor with contempt. "That bag of bones, not a chance," one woman snorted, clutching her little girl's hand. James straightened, ignoring the sideways glances, and walked to the registration tent. An auction, today of all days. Who would bid on a lost cause? As the bidding began, the crowd was thick with laughter and bravado. Young men egged each other on. A few breeders eyed the healthier stock. When Valor's turn came, silence fell for a beat. Then a bored voice. £10 for dog food. Laughter. James, voice steady, called out, "50!" Heads turned. Someone jeered, "You're throwing your money away, mate!" Another voice, "70!" James locked eyes with the auctioneer, jaw set. 80. The other bidder, a smirking man in tweed, raised it to 100, and a ripple of excitement ran through the crowd. A bidding war. James felt his heart pounding, but it wasn't fear. It was that stubborn surge he'd only known in battle and on the back of a trusted horse. 150, he said, louder now, voice clear as the rain. The crowd grew quiet, tension buzzing, some watching for a spectacle, others for disaster. The man in tweed shrugged, stepping back. Not worth the hay. The auctioneer paused, glanced at Valor, then at James. Sold. James exhaled, muscles relaxing all at once. He moved through the crowd to claim his prize, bracing for the taunts. "He's yours, you nutter," someone called, but James didn't care. Valor stared at him, unblinking. A connection, a flicker of trust passed between them. For a brief second, James swore he saw Shadow's soft gaze in Valor's wary eyes. Loading Valor into his trailer was a struggle. The horse balked at every shadow, muscles shuddering at the sight of a raised hand, the memory of past violence still visible in every step. James worked slow, voice low, never rushing, never forcing. The rain thickened, mud pooling at their feet, but James didn't falter. "We've both been through storms, haven't we?" he murmured, guiding Valor up the ramp with patience born of pain. As James drove out of the rescue center, the truck's old heater barely cutting the chill, the countryside rolled by in sullen silence. Every bump in the road made Valor whinny nervously. But James hummed softly, remembering how Shadow used to settle to the sound of an old country tune. "You're safe now," he promised. "Whatever happens, you're safe." Flashes of memory pulsed in his mind. The sound of mortars in the dark. The feel of Shadow's warm breath on his face as he shook with nightmares. The soft nudge that always brought him back. Could Valor become what Shadow had been? An anchor? A friend? James shook his head, not daring to hope yet. When he pulled into the muddy driveway of his rundown farm, the sky was nearly black. The old barn was barely standing, a silhouette against the dim light of the house. James's teenage daughter, Emily, appeared at the door, arms crossed, her face a thundercloud of worry and anger. Charlie, his young son, darted out barefoot, eyes wide with excitement. "Is that him? The horse?" he shouted over the rain. James just nodded, too tired to explain. Getting Valor into the barn was another battle. Gates slamming, thunder cracking, the horse spooking and slipping in the muck, nearly knocking James off his feet. Emily glared. "We can't afford this." Charlie cheered. "He's awesome, Dad." In the chaos, James lost his balance. Boots skidding in the mud, hands stinging from rope burns. For a second, he wanted to quit. But Valor stopped, just for a heartbeat, and let James lead him into the dim shelter. As the barn door swung closed behind them, the world outside faded, leaving only the ragged breaths of man and horse, the pounding of rain, and the thinnest thread of hope. James leaned his head against Valor's trembling shoulder, feeling the old ache and the new promise. "He's mine," James whispered, voice shaking with resolve, as the storm raged and the doubters jeered beyond the walls. He didn't care. He had rescued Valor, and maybe, just maybe, Valor would rescue him too. James barely slept that first night with Valor in the barn, the wind moaning through the gaps in the old roof, every gust a fresh reminder of how precarious everything had become. He lay awake, listening for any sign of trouble, ready to bolt upright if Valor cried out or the barn gave way. In the darkness, he thought about all the ways this could go wrong, how another mouth to feed might tip the farm over the edge, how Emily's anger seemed colder than the Yorkshire rain, how his own strength felt worn thin as threadbare jeans. But when the first gray light crept over the fields, James was already pulling on muddy boots, heart pounding with a mix of dread and purpose. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the old kitchen clock and the shudder of the ancient radiator. He poured a mug of coffee, hands shaking a little, then stepped out into the yard, bracing against the damp chill that seeped through every seam. The barn stood crooked against the pale sky, the door groaning as James swung it open. Valor lifted his head, eyes wary but not wild, one ear cocked as if listening for trouble. The horse had barely moved all night. He still stood where James had left him, straw scattered around his hooves, sides shivering from the cold and the newness of it all. For a moment, James just watched him breathe, a living symbol of everything he'd risked and everything he stood to lose. Footsteps splashed through the mud behind him. Charlie, all wild hair and sleepy excitement, clutched a scoop of grain in his hands. "Can I feed him, Dad?" James nodded, managing a tired smile. "Go slow, bud. Let him come to you." Charlie held out his hand, trembling a bit, and Valor, hesitant at first, reached forward, lips brushing the grain. The boy's face lit up, joy plain as day. Emily appeared in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, her gaze sharp and cold. She took in the state of the barn, the leaking roof, the broken stall door, the pathetic pile of hay, and shook her head. "We can't afford this, Dad," she said quietly, but her words cut like a shout. "You know how much the feed bill is already, and winter's not even here." James kept his voice even. "We'll manage. We always do." But he heard the doubt in his own words. Emily didn't answer, just turned and stomped back to the house. James watched her go, a sinking feeling in his gut. He spent the morning patching the worst of the leaks with tarps and lengths of rope, cursing the cold as water dripped down his collar. Valor watched every move, tense but curious, shifting his weight from hoof to hoof. At one point, a gust of wind slammed the barn door, startling the horse. Valor bolted, nearly wrenching free of his rope. James scrambled after him, boots slipping in the mud, heart hammering. "Easy! Whoa!" For a tense moment, James thought he might lose him, but he caught the rope, steadying both himself and the horse. Valor snorted, breath visible in the cold air, but didn't try to run again. Charlie giggled from his perch atop an overturned bucket. "He's fast," James grinned, breathless. "Yeah, he is. Let's hope he stays that way for good reasons." They finished cleaning out Valor's stall, spreading the little hay they had left, working together in quiet rhythm as the rain drummed on the tin roof. By midday, Emily had retreated to her room, the door closed tight. James found her later, hunched over her laptop, job applications open on the screen. He leaned in the doorway, unsure what to say. "I know things are tough, but he needed a chance. So do we." Emily didn't look up. "We need money, not another project. If I get something in Leeds, I'm taking it." The finality in her voice stung, but James only nodded. He didn't have answers. Not yet. That evening, the storm picked up. Rain lashing the house, wind rattling windows in their frames. The kitchen was tense. Charlie chattered about Valor, filling the silence with stories and dreams, while Emily kept her eyes on her phone, tapping out messages to friends in the city. James stared at his hands, calloused and cracked, wondering what it would take to hold this family together. Suddenly, a shout from the barn cut through the noise. James leapt up, heart pounding. He raced outside, skidding through mud, Charlie close behind. Valor was spooked. Something had crashed, maybe a loose branch in the wind. The horse reared, hooves slamming against the stall door, eyes wide with panic. James moved in fast, hands steady despite the chaos. "Whoa, easy, Valor. You're okay, boy. I'm here." He kept talking, low and calm, inching closer until he could lay a gentle hand on Valor's neck. Gradually, the horse settled, sides still heaving, but no longer wild-eyed. Charlie pressed close, stroking Valor's mane. "He's just scared, like you were after—" He stopped, uncertain, but James nodded. "Yeah, like me." For a long moment, they just stood together in the muddy straw, the barn rattling around them, each drawing strength from the other. Back in the house, Emily watched them through the rain-streaked window, her anger flickering into something like worry, or maybe hope. Later, as James sat at the kitchen table staring at the unpaid bills, Charlie tugged at his sleeve. "You're not going to give up, are you?" James shook his head, voice rough but sure. "Not on Valor. Not on us." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the battered barn, the first seeds of trust took root, between man and horse, father and son, and, maybe if they were lucky, the whole family. Morning crept over the Thompson farm slow and uncertain, like a shy apology after so much rain and worry. The sky was still a sullen gray, but for the first time since Valor's arrival, there was a sense of calm in the house, a rare peace, fragile as glass. James rolled out of bed early, wincing at the stiffness in his knees, a familiar ache that seemed to come with every hard choice and every sleepless night. He dressed quietly, boots thudding on the floorboards, careful not to wake Charlie, who slept curled around a battered, stuffed fox or Emily, who had stayed up late scrolling through job listings on her phone. James brewed his coffee and let it sit untouched on the counter, mind already in the barn with Valor. He pulled on his oldest jacket and stepped outside, breathing in the sharp, cold air. The fields shimmered with dew and fog. In the barn, Valor stood as if he'd never moved, head hanging, flanks streaked with mud and old wounds. But his eyes were clearer, watching James approach with something that could almost be curiosity. "Morning, partner," James said softly. He kept his movements slow, his voice steady, as he slid open the stall and knelt in the straw beside Valor. The horse flinched at first, but didn't bolt, just shifted his weight and watched, muscles tight under scarred skin. James took a clean rag and a bucket of warm water, wringing out the cloth and starting gently with Valor's legs. He worked in silence, murmuring now and then, letting the rhythm of his hands do the talking. Charlie soon appeared, his breath a white puff in the cold air, hair wild and smile sleepy. "Can I help, Dad?" he whispered, as if afraid to break the spell. James nodded, passing him a curry comb. "Just gentle, okay?" The boy grinned, kneeling down beside him, humming a silly tune as he worked. At first, Valor twitched away, but as the minutes ticked by, something in the barn shifted. A new trust, tentative but real. James lost himself in the work. Each scrape and cut on Valor's hide told a story, and as he cleaned and dressed the wounds, he found his own mind wandering back to old battles, nights in Afghanistan, sand in his teeth, the echo of gunfire. His hands began to tremble. For a heartbeat, the barn faded away, replaced by the harsh crack of mortars and the frantic beat of his own heart. Then he felt it, a nudge, gentle but insistent. Valor had turned his head, pressing his damp nose into James's arm, anchoring him back to the present. James let out a long breath, shoulders sagging in relief. "Thanks, buddy," he whispered, blinking hard. Charlie looked up, concern flickering in his eyes, but James smiled and shook his head. "Just tired, that's all." The barn was quiet except for the soft rustle of hay and the steady, comforting rhythm of Charlie's humming. When Emily arrived a little later, she stood in the doorway for a long time, arms crossed, watching father and son work. She didn't say a word, just leaned against the frame, her expression unreadable. But when James climbed up to patch a leaky section of the roof, she handed him nails and steadied the ladder. Her help was silent, reluctant, but there all the same. Together they mended as much as they could, the barn slowly becoming less a ruin and more a refuge. Later, as sunlight filtered through the patched roof, Valor finally lifted his head, ears pricking at the sound of Charlie's laughter. The boy sat cross-legged in the straw, sharing stories of school and dreams about teaching Valor tricks. Jumping fences, racing wind, maybe even winning a ribbon someday. James watched as the horse inched closer, drawn by the boy's soft voice and easy smile. Lunch was quiet in the farmhouse. Emily pushed her food around, phone face down on the table. Charlie, still full of barn dust and optimism, rattled on about Valor, his voice a hopeful drumbeat. James sat back, listening, letting their words fill the empty corners of the house. That afternoon, while Charlie napped and Emily pored over her laptop, James returned to the barn alone. The chores were endless, mending fences, hauling water, checking the tack, but he didn't mind. Each task was a step forward, a way to keep fear and memory at bay. Sometimes, when the world went quiet and the ache in his chest grew too sharp, he'd just stand beside Valor, hand resting on the horse's neck, both of them drawing comfort from the warmth of simple company. Dusk brought a hush over the farm, the world wrapped in blue and silver. Emily wandered out to the barn again, watching as Valor nuzzled Charlie's hand, finally trusting the boy enough to accept a treat. She sat quietly on a hay bale, just listening to their laughter, the night air full of something almost like hope. That night, as James tucked Charlie into bed, the boy whispered, "I think Valor's starting to like it here." James nodded, heart swelling with cautious optimism. "Yeah, bud, I think you're right." Out in the barn, Valor lay down in the straw for the first time since arriving, body relaxed, breath slow and steady. James watched from the doorway, a wave of relief washing over him. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long while, the old house felt like home. Word of Valor's arrival spread fast, faster than rain down the Yorkshire hills. It started at the feed store, where the clerk raised an eyebrow at James's extra sack of oats and muttered, "That for the nag you dragged home." Then it swept through the aisles of the village grocery, bounced from neighbor to neighbor, and finally settled in the far corner of the Red Lion pub, where the regulars dissected every rumor over pints of bitter and greasy chips. "Thompson's lost his head," one man said, his voice carrying over the low hum of conversation. "Buying a half-dead horse with money he doesn't have, all while his farm's falling to bits." Another leaned in, shaking his head. "Heard it was an old racehorse, can barely stand. Should have let it go, save his family the trouble." The barmaid, polishing glasses, listened with a worried frown. She'd grown up with James, remembered better days, but even she found herself doubting his sense. Outside the pub, Charlie felt the weight of whispers at school. He tried to keep his head down, but kids always find the cracks. "Your dad's horse is rubbish," a boy sneered at recess, and another mimicked a limping gait around the playground. Charlie balled his fists but kept his mouth shut, swallowing every retort. He couldn't explain to them what he saw in Valor's eyes, or how the horse's quiet courage made their little farm feel less lonely. At home, Emily grew more restless. The kitchen table was cluttered with bills and her open laptop, job postings for leads glowing on the screen. She'd gotten an interview at a sandwich shop, and the idea of leaving the farm tugged at her every waking thought. Some mornings she'd stand at the window, watching James muck out the barn, the silhouette of her father moving slow and steady beside the scarred horse. She tried to imagine life in the city, her own bed, her own money, no more scraping by. But the thought of leaving her brother behind made her ache in a way she didn't dare voice. James knew about the whispers. He heard them at the hardware store, felt the stares when he walked past the bakery, even caught a bit of laughter in the churchyard after Sunday service. But he shut it all out, losing himself in the rhythm of the farm. Early morning chores, endless repairs, feeding and grooming Valor with a patience that surprised even him. Every day, the horse grew a little less fearful, taking an apple from Charlie's hand, letting Emily brush the dirt from his mane, standing calmly while James checked his legs. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was progress. One gray afternoon, James came home from the feed store with a second-hand halter and a sack of carrots. He found Charlie sitting in the barn, legs crossed, reading aloud from an adventure book while Valor nibbled at the straw. The sight made James pause, a moment of ordinary magic, boy and horse wrapped in their own world. Emily arrived with a brush, her resolve to leave softened by the sight. She didn't say a word about Leeds that night. Instead, she helped make a stew, sitting a little closer to her family at dinner. But the village wasn't done talking. The next day at school, Charlie was cornered again. "I heard your dad's horse can't even run. Is it gonna die?" a classmate asked, and the question cut sharper than intended. Charlie shrugged, trying not to care, but he felt small. When he came home, mud on his boots and anger in his eyes, James asked, "Everything all right?" Charlie shook his head and disappeared upstairs, his answer hidden in the slamming of his door. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, James wandered out to the barn, feeling the ache of the day in his bones. He stood quietly by Valor's stall, running his hand down the horse's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the battered skin. "They don't know you," he whispered. "They never will. Not like we do." Valor nickered softly, leaning into the touch. Later, Emily joined him, arms folded tight against the cold. She didn't say much, just stood beside her father, both of them watching Valor doze in the straw. "Do you really think he's worth it?" she asked, voice barely more than a breath. James nodded, the answer coming from someplace deeper than reason. "He's worth fighting for," he said. "Sometimes that's all you need." Slowly, the family began to knit together again, tiny moments building a bridge over the worries and the gossip. Charlie drew pictures of Valor and taped them to the fridge. Emily started coming out to the barn before bed, just to say goodnight. James kept working, day after day, holding tight to hope as the world watched and waited for him to fail. And if the village still whispered, the Thompsons let them. Their world was changing, quiet as dawn, inside the battered barn, in the small gestures of trust between horse and family, in the stubborn refusal to let doubt win. Even when the future felt uncertain, even when the days were hard, James believed broken things could mend, and maybe, just maybe, one stubborn horse could teach an entire village what hope really looked like. Frost dusted the muddy lane as James shouldered open the barn door, a plume of breath swirling in the cold morning light. Each day with Valor brought a small victory, a hesitant nudge, a moment of calm, a head raised in curiosity instead of fear. But today James felt the weight of every decision he'd made pressing hard on his chest. Feed was running low again. The roof still leaked despite his patchwork repairs, and the bills stacked on the kitchen table seemed to multiply overnight. He had to keep moving forward. He had to find a way. Valor was standing in his stall, ears pricked as James approached, Charlie already chattering softly beside him. "Dad, I read that you can help a horse trust you by letting them sniff your hands. Watch, see?" Charlie held out his palm, patient and steady. Valor reached out, nostrils flaring, and nudged the boy's fingers. A flash of hope darted through James's chest, warming him against the cold. "Good job, bud," he said. "Let's keep going." That morning, James heard the rumble of an old van in the yard and the heavy tread of boots on frozen mud. Mr. Buckley, the village farrier, was as much a part of Yorkshire as the hills themselves. Broad-shouldered, gruff, with wiry white hair poking out from under his cap. "Morning, Thompson," he called, his voice gravelly. "Heard you've got a project in here for me." He eyed Valor with a practiced glance, taking in every scar and uneven hoof. "Let's have a look." The old man got to work without fuss, his tools laid out in neat rows, his hands steady despite the cold. Charlie watched, wide-eyed, as Mr. Buckley lifted each hoof, scraping away dirt and trimming the cracked edges with gentle authority. Valor tensed but didn't bolt, shivering more from memory than pain. "Not as bad as he looks," Buckley muttered, mostly to himself. "He'll come right with a bit of work." He glanced up at James. "You're doing right by him. Just takes patience and guts. Most folks don't have much of either these days. The words hung in the cold air, more valuable than money. With the hooves done and Valor standing a bit taller, James decided it was time to take the next step. He rummaged through a box of old tack and found a faded blue blanket. Charlie helped him drape it over Valor's back, and to everyone's relief, the horse only flinched a little, nostrils quivering but legs steady. "See?" Charlie whispered. "He knows we won't hurt him." James grinned, hope blooming brighter. After lunch, James fetched a lead and carefully fastened it to Valor's halter. He coaxed the horse into the yard, each step uncertain. Emily stood at the window, arms folded, watching with a mix of doubt and something softer. James led Valor in a slow, lopsided circle, every muscle in his own body tense, bracing for trouble. But Valor followed, awkward but willing, eyes locked on James as if searching for cues. Charlie couldn't help but cheer, clapping so loud Valor's ears flicked in surprise. "Try again, Dad," Charlie called. James did, and this time Valor moved with a little more confidence. The sun broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the muddy field, and for a brief moment, the world seemed new. Later, as James rubbed Valor down with straw, Mr. Buckley packed up his tools, his gruff manner softened by a smile. "You'll do, lad," he said, nodding at Valor. "He's got spirit. Don't let the naysayers wear you down." With a final tip of his cap, he disappeared down the lane, leaving behind a barn full of possibility. By late afternoon, word had already spread. A neighbor walking his dog paused by the fence. "Saw him out there trotting a circle," he said. "Didn't think you'd manage it, Thompson. Might have to eat my words." James just smiled, not trusting himself to say more. The next few days brought a flurry of progress. James worked Valor in the paddock, his voice a steady drumbeat of encouragement. Charlie joined every session, charting Valor's steps in a school notebook for a project he'd started. Even Emily, though she kept her distance, found herself lingering by the barn door, drawn in by the rhythm of the work and the slow, steady change in the horse she'd called hopeless. The villagers' gossip shifted, curiosity overtaking scorn. More neighbors stopped by, sometimes leaving a handful of carrots or a bundle of hay at the gate. For the first time in years, James felt the walls around the farm start to crumble, replaced by a cautious respect he hadn't known he missed. At the end of the week, Valor completed a full, proud trot around the paddock, head high and tail flicking. James felt a lump in his throat as Charlie whooped, and Emily even managed a grin. "Look at him go," she murmured, barely loud enough to hear. James reached out and rested a hand on Valor's neck, feeling the thrum of life, the pulse of hope. As dusk settled in, the barn glowed with warmth. Lamplight flickering, the smell of fresh straw, the sound of laughter rising. For the first time in a long time, James let himself believe they were turning a corner. He whispered into Valor's ear, voice low and full of promise. "We're just getting started, old friend." And in that moment, surrounded by family and the slow-burning hope of a Yorkshire spring, it finally felt true. November wrapped Yorkshire in a deep chill, the kind that seeped into every crack and made even the strongest bones ache. But James was too busy to notice the cold, his days packed with feeding, training, and repairing the battered farm as Valor's progress became the new pulse of the household. The Thompson family found themselves drawn together in small, steady routines. Charlie up before sunrise to check on Valor. Emily stopping by the barn on her way to school with a shy apple or a quick brush of the mane. James, for his part, lived in a state of tired but grateful motion, never letting himself pause for doubt. But as bonfire night approached, the village grew restless. Children paraded down the lanes with sparklers and paper lanterns, the distant crack of fireworks echoing every evening as practice for the main event. James watched the sky warily, remembering last year's bonfire, and how even indoors he couldn't escape the memories. The whoomp of explosions, the sudden surge of adrenaline, the feeling of shadow at his side calming him down. He worried for Valor, who still jumped at a slammed door or an unexpected shout. The night of the village bonfire arrived colder than ever, the whole valley buzzing with excitement. Emily pleaded with her father to come along. "Just for an hour, Dad. Charlie wants to see the big fire." But James shook his head, eyes on the barn. "You two go have fun. Valor needs me tonight." Emily hesitated, her disappointment plain, but she wrapped a scarf around Charlie and promised to bring back marshmallows. James bundled up and headed out to the barn, lantern in hand. Valor paced his stall, ears flicking at every sound. The first firework exploded in the distance, a starburst of color lighting the sky. Valor snorted and skittered, eyes rolling with panic. "Easy, boy," James murmured, trying to keep his voice calm as another volley boomed over the fields. He remembered Afghanistan, remembered the nights when even Shadow's steady presence wasn't enough to ground him. The noise intensified, echoing off the hills. Valor started to rear, nostrils flaring, muscles taut as a bowstring. James reached for the old radio on the feed shelf, turning the dial until soft country music filled the barn. He began to talk, not soothing nonsense, but real stories. He told Valor about Shadow, about the night he first rode her after months of therapy, about the mistakes and the victories and the stubborn hope that kept him trying again and again. The horse's wildness faded just a little as James spoke, as if the words themselves were a lifeline. A sudden barrage of fireworks made Valor bolt sideways, crashing against the stall. James acted on instinct, stepping between the horse and the wall, his hands gentle on Valor's neck. "You're not alone," he whispered, pressing his forehead to Valor's. "I've been through worse, and so have you. We'll get through tonight together." They stayed like that, barn and man and horse shuddering under the storm of sound, until the sky finally fell silent, and only the gentle thump of Valor's heart remained. Emily and Charlie returned late, cheeks flushed and hands sticky with melted chocolate. "You should have seen the bonfire, Dad," Charlie exclaimed, dancing around the kitchen, still riding the high of the celebration. Emily handed James a marshmallow, her look softening when she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "How was Valor?" she asked quietly. "Scared," James admitted, "but brave." The next morning brought a different kind of celebration. Charlie burst into the kitchen waving a blue ribbon. "Dad, guess what? My project on Valor won the prize. Mrs. Hewitt said nobody wrote about a horse with more heart." He handed James the ribbon, his pride uncontainable. James smiled, letting himself bask in Charlie's joy. "You earned it, bud." And so did Valor. That afternoon, they took Valor out into the paddock, the ground still muddy from the week's rain. James ran Valor through their usual drills, voice steady, movements sure. Valor's trot was strong, his head up, his trust in James clear. Emily and Charlie cheered from the fence, laughter mixing with the crisp air. Neighbors walking by paused to watch, their curiosity growing by the day. Even the old man from the Red Lion, who once called Valor a lost cause, tipped his cap in greeting. Days settled into a hopeful rhythm. Charlie added the blue ribbon to a makeshift Valor wall in the barn, pinning up sketches and notes about their progress. Emily became a fixture at Valor's side, quietly helping with chores, her doubts now spoken less and less. Even James, who rarely allowed himself the luxury of hope, found that he smiled more at Valor, at his kids, even at the future. And every night, as the wind howled and the barn creaked, James stayed up late, sitting on a bale of straw beside Valor, sharing quiet moments that healed old wounds. They'd survived the storm of bonfire night, man and horse alike, and with every passing day, the Thompson family grew a little stronger, a little braver, ready for whatever came next. For the first time in a long while, hope felt like something they could hold on to. Not just a wish, but a way forward, carried on the steady beat of hooves and the laughter echoing from a Yorkshire barn. By early spring, the village buzzed with talk of the upcoming fete, a day when neighbors set aside old grudges and gathered for games, contests, and, most importantly, the annual horse show on the village green. For weeks, Emily debated whether they should enter Valor, still unsure if the world outside their little farm would see the horse's scars as signs of strength or reminders of old pain. But Charlie was relentless. "We have to show everyone how brave he is now," he insisted, waving the blue ribbon he'd won for his school project. Even James, cautious by nature, let himself be swayed by the idea that maybe, just maybe, Valor was ready. In the days leading up to the fete, the farm was a whirlwind of preparation. Emily brushed Valor until his coat shone as much as possible, gently working ribbons into his mane and tail. Charlie ran practice laps in the muddy paddock, guiding Valor through the commands they'd practiced all winter: walk, halt, turn, back up. The horse, still limping a little from old injuries but moving with new confidence, responded to Charlie's quiet encouragement with small but steady steps. Even James, who had spent months just trying to get Valor to trust him, found himself swept up in a strange mixture of pride and nervousness. The morning of the fete dawned bright and clear, the air charged with the smells of fresh grass and frying sausages. James loaded Valor into the battered trailer, his hands sweating despite the chill. Charlie clambered in after him, voice bubbling with excitement, while Emily packed sandwiches and apples for the long day ahead. They parked at the edge of the green, as far away from the gleaming trailers and polished horses as possible, hearts pounding with anticipation and nerves. The village green was transformed. Tents fluttered in the breeze, children ran with painted faces, and the horse ring was already surrounded by a crowd. The Thompsons led Valor to a quiet corner, heads turning as they passed. There were stares, of course, some curious, some skeptical, a few openly amused. James ignored them all, focusing on Valor's breathing, keeping his own nerves in check. As their class was called, Charlie walked Valor into the ring. James and Emily stood at the rope, watching every step, hardly daring to breathe. The other horses were glossy and powerful, their handlers dressed in crisp jackets, every movement polished by years of training. Valor looked small beside them, his scars still visible, his movements a little uncertain. But when Charlie gave the first command, "Walk on," Valor responded, his stride slow but steady. The judge, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile, watched closely as Charlie guided Valor through the paces. Walk, halt, turn, back up. Each move was shaky at first, but with every encouraging word from Charlie, Valor found his rhythm. There was a pause before the last pattern. Charlie bent close, whispering something only the horse could hear. Valor lifted his head and trotted the last few steps, tail swishing with pride. A murmur rippled through the crowd. James could hear snippets. Is that Thompson's horse? Didn't think that old nag would make it this far. Emily gripped the rope, her face bright with hope and tears. When the judge handed out awards, they didn't expect much. But after the ribbons for first and second, she called for a special plaque. The Comeback Award. She handed it to Charlie, saying, "For showing us all that courage isn't just for the winners." Charlie's grin was as bright as the sun. He hugged Valor's neck, nearly crying with happiness, and Emily ran into the ring, wrapping her brother in her arms. James stood back, letting the pride and relief flood through him. The crowd, which had once gossiped about their foolishness, now offered cautious nods and a few claps. A neighbor handed James a bag of carrots, another offered some spare tack, and a child from Charlie's class came up shyly to pet Valor's nose. As the afternoon faded, the Thompsons lingered at the green, talking to neighbors and laughing in a way they hadn't for years. James noticed Emily slip away to join some old friends, her laughter ringing clear. He found himself telling stories about Valor, about the barn flood, about second chances, and people listened, really listened, for the first time in a long while. Packing up to head home, James caught Charlie still staring at his plaque. "Proud of you, bud," James said, tousling his hair. Charlie looked up, eyes shining. "Proud of Valor, too. He did it, Dad." James glanced at the horse, now dozing in the afternoon sun. "Yeah, he really did." That evening, as the farm settled into its familiar quiet, James lingered in the barn, rubbing Valor's neck. Emily joined him, leaning against the stall. "You know, for the first time since Mom died, I feel like we're a family again," she said, her voice soft. James didn't answer, just pulled her close. Charlie came running in, the plaque held high, and Valor gave a soft nicker, as if he knew this day belonged to them all. They left the barn door open that night, the sounds of laughter and hope spilling out into the dark. And as the village fete faded into memory, the Thompsons knew they'd done more than prove a point. They'd shown their town, and themselves, that real victory was measured not in blue ribbons but in the courage to keep going, one step at a time, together. The night after the fete was restless. A low grumble of thunder rolled over Yorkshire, echoing across the patchwork fields, rattling window panes and sending shivers through every living thing. Rain had been threatening for days, and when it finally broke, it came down in angry sheets, pounding the barn roof and turning the lane to deep, sticky mud. James woke at dawn to the drum of water on the eaves, already uneasy, a sense of trouble settling in his bones. He dressed quickly and pulled on his boots, the air heavy with the scent of rain and wet earth. Stepping outside, he was met with a scene that chilled him deeper than the cold ever could. Water pooling in the low places, streaming down from the hills, gathering in dark, swirling puddles around the barn's foundation. The roof, never properly mended, sagged under the weight of fresh water. James's heart thudded with dread. Inside the barn, Valor was anxious, his ears swiveling to every noise, hooves shifting restlessly in the straw. Charlie was already there, his pajamas muddy, arms wrapped around Valor's neck. "Dad, the water's coming in," he said, voice trembling. James looked down. Already the straw was soaked, little rivers running through the aisles. He moved fast, urging Charlie out of the way and trying to lead Valor to higher ground inside the barn. But just as he did, a terrible crack split the air. The far corner of the roof gave way, sending a flood of rain and splintered wood crashing to the floor. Valor panicked, rearing up and jerking away from James's grip. Emily dashed in, pulled by the commotion, her face white with fear. "Dad!" she shouted. For a moment it was chaos. Valor slipping in the mud, James scrambling to keep hold of him, Charlie crying out in fear. Emily rushed to gather what dry feed she could, shoving bales onto higher crates as the water rose. Then, as quickly as it had started, Valor slipped and went down hard, legs tangled in the ruined straw, one hind leg twisting at a bad angle. James's blood ran cold. He rushed to the horse's side, calling Emily and Charlie over. Together, hearts pounding, they managed to calm Valor just enough to assess the damage. The horse tried to rise but stumbled, unable to put weight on the injured leg. James bit back panic. "We have to move him! Now!" he said through gritted teeth. But where? The barn was flooding fast. Out in the storm, James caught sight of headlights approaching. Their neighbor, Mr. Lister, drawn by the noise and the worry that comes when old barns groan in the wind. "You folks need help?" he shouted over the rain. James didn't hesitate. "We have to get Valor out. He's hurt." Within minutes, Mr. Lister had rallied 2 more neighbors from up the lane. They brought planks, rope, tarps, anything that might work. Together, in the lashing rain, they fashioned a crude sling, bundling Valor's injured leg as best they could. It was a desperate, muddy effort, all hands and shouted instructions. But with teamwork and persistence, they managed to coax Valor out into the yard. The horse limped badly but moved, every step a grim testament to his will. Emily and Charlie ran ahead to Mr. Lister's barn, a newer, drier structure on higher ground. They filled a stall with dry straw, fetched buckets of water, and spread out blankets for warmth. As Valor stumbled into the safety of the neighbor's barn, the Thompsons collapsed in relief, soaked to the bone and shaking. Emily slumped against the wall, her breath coming in sobs. Charlie, pale and silent, held Valor's nose in his hands, whispering that it was going to be okay. Mr. Lister brought tea for the family, and his wife appeared with an armful of dry towels. "You did right by him," she said gently, helping to wrap Charlie in warmth. "He's safe now." But the crisis was far from over. Valor's leg was badly strained, and the old barn was ruined. Half the roof gone, the rest so waterlogged it wouldn't last the week. James stared at the wreckage through the sheets of rain, despair creeping in. Emily, always practical, snapped a few photos with her phone and posted them online, along with a plea for help. Family farm flooded, rescue horse injured, anything helps. She didn't expect much, but within hours, messages began to arrive. Friends, neighbors, strangers from as far as Leeds offered small donations, words of support, and even a few volunteers. The response humbled James, a reminder that, even after all they'd been through, they weren't as alone as he sometimes feared. Over the next days, the family lived in borrowed boots, working alongside neighbors to salvage what they could. James split his time between repairing the old barn, organizing supplies, and tending to Valor's injured leg, icing it, keeping the horse company, and reading aloud when Charlie's voice gave out. Emily coordinated deliveries and posted updates online, her determination shining through. Charlie wrote about the ordeal in his school journal, ending every entry with, "I believe in Valor. He believes in us." Mr. Lister's barn became their refuge, a place of laughter, exhaustion, and stubborn hope. The village, once content to gossip at a distance, now gathered to help. Some brought tools, others hot food or blankets. Even old rivals offered hands, driven by the sight of one horse's struggle to rise again. By week's end, the clouds parted and sunlight spilled across the battered land. The Thompsons had raised enough money to buy timber and repair the barn, thanks to the kindness of neighbors and strangers alike. Valor's leg began to heal, slowly but surely. One morning, James found the horse standing strong, head high, eyes clear. "We're still here, old friend," James murmured, voice thick with gratitude. "Still standing." And in that moment, with mud still thick on their boots, but hope shining in every glance, the Thompsons realized that what had started as a rescue was now something far bigger, a community reborn, one barn, one family, and one battered, stubborn horse at a time. The weeks after the flood blurred into a steady rhythm of hard work and guarded hope. The old barn, once nothing more than a patchwork of repairs and prayers, now rose each day in new form. Planks of fresh timber, some donated, some bought with money raised online, gave the structure a sturdiness the farm hadn't seen in years. The Thompsons' neighbors came and went with hammers and saws, children carried water and paint, and even strangers who'd followed Valor's story on social media sent care packages or words of encouragement. For once, the Thompson farm was not a lonely place. It was the heart of a small, bustling community. Valor's recovery was slow, marked by pain and patience. Each morning, James massaged the old horse's injured leg, wrapped it tight, and led him in careful circles around the paddock, testing the healing muscles. There were days when Valor limped badly, and James feared he'd pushed too far, but then the horse would nuzzle him, eyes bright with determination. Emily watched each session with a mix of anxiety and pride, helping her father ice the leg and whispering encouragement into Valor's ear. Charlie was never far away, cheering every small improvement, scribbling notes in his battered school journal. By the time spring spread green across Yorkshire, the new barn stood solid and dry, and Valor was back on his feet, head high, mane shining in the sunlight. That was when the invitation arrived, a crisp envelope with county letterhead. The regional eventing competition was coming up: dressage, show jumping, and cross-country. "Must be a mistake," James muttered, turning the letter over in his hands. "We're not champions. We're just—" But Charlie interrupted, eyes glowing with hope. "Dad, what if it's not a mistake? What if it's a sign?" Emily, standing at the kitchen sink, dried her hands and said, "We've come this far. Why not finish the story?" It wasn't about winning for any of them. It was about showing everyone what a rescue horse and a stubborn family could do. So they agreed. For a week, the farm became a training ground. Emily helped braid Valor's mane and polish the old tack. Charlie set up homemade jumps in the paddock, buckets and broomsticks and hay bales, and cheered Valor through every new challenge. James worked on dressage routines, taking advice from neighbors who'd once doubted him. The whole village watched, some offering tips, others bringing tea and sandwiches, all secretly rooting for the underdogs. On the day of the competition, the Thompsons woke before sunrise, hearts pounding. They loaded Valor into the trailer and set off for the fairgrounds, a little convoy of battered truck, nervous laughter, and hope. The fairground shimmered with early light, horses gleaming, competitors in crisp coats. All eyes on the newcomers as James and his family led Valor to the entry gate. There was a hush when they arrived. A rescue horse with scars and a limp, led by a veteran and two kids, standing among the best in Yorkshire. Dressage was first. The arena was quiet, judges poised with pens. James guided Valor through the pattern, voice steady, hands gentle. Valor hesitated at first, but soon found his rhythm, the bond between man and horse clear in every move. Emily and Charlie watched from the rail, holding their breath until the judges nodded, a faint smile on one face. "Not perfect," the judge said afterward, "but full of heart." Next came show jumping. The course was a tangle of bright rails and painted obstacles. James glanced at Charlie, who whispered, "You can do it, Dad. You both can." Valor cleared the first two jumps, faltered at the third, but refused to give up. The crowd held its breath as he gathered himself and leaped, barely scraping the rail, but clearing it. There were cheers, a few gasps, even a shout of, "Go on, Thompson!" from a familiar voice in the stands. Cross-country was last, the hardest test. Muddy fields, water hazards, and log fences. James rode with every muscle tense, Valor's breath coming quick. They reached the water jump, and for a moment, Valor froze, remembering pain and storms. James leaned low, whispering, "Foreshadow, for all of us." Valor pawed the ground, then surged forward, splashing through the obstacle, rainwater and hope flying in every direction. The final jump loomed, a high fence, crowd silent, everything on the line. Valor's muscles bunched, James's heart hammered, and together they soared, clearing it clean. There were shouts, applause, and more than a few tears in the stands. Emily wiped her eyes, Charlie hugged her tight, and the announcer's voice rang out. "Winner of the Heart and Soul Award, James Thompson and Valor." The plaque was simple, but in James's hands, it felt heavier than any medal. He slid from the saddle, wrapping his arms around Valor's neck, tears and rain mixing on his cheeks. The crowd swarmed the family, offering handshakes, congratulations, and even apologies from old skeptics. "Didn't believe you'd do it, Thompson. I was wrong." James smiled through tears. "We all get second chances." As the fairgrounds emptied and the sky turned gold, the Thompsons loaded Valor for the ride home. They were tired, soaked, and happier than they'd ever been. On the way back, Charlie held the plaque like a treasure. Emily dozed against the window, and James drove in silence, his heart fuller than it had been in years. That night, the new barn glowed with warmth. Neighbors stopped by to celebrate. Children ran in the yard, and Valor stood in his stall, calm and proud. James lingered by his side, stroking the horse's neck. "You did it, old friend," he whispered. "We did it together." The farm had changed, the family had changed, and the village, too. Where once there had been only struggle and suspicion, there was now community, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refuse to quit. And as sleep settled over Yorkshire, a battered horse and his family knew, whatever storms might come, they would always face them together. The days after the competition unfurled slow and sweet across the Yorkshire countryside. The world outside the Thompson farmhouse softer and somehow brighter than it had been in years. The gold Heart and Soul Award plaque found a place of honor on the kitchen mantel, right above the battered kettle and the ever-present pile of bills. It glowed in the morning sun, a quiet testament to how far they'd come. Charlie dusted it every day, pride shining in his eyes, while Emily sent photos of it to her friends in Leeds, her laughter lighter with every phone call. Valor, too, seemed changed. There was a spring to his step even as he moved slow, the limp now barely noticeable. His eyes followed James everywhere, not with the wary watchfulness of a broken animal, but with the calm assurance of an old friend. The scars on his flanks and legs remained, but they were badges now, marks of survival, proof that pain didn't have the last word. Life on the farm settled into a new kind of rhythm. James rose before dawn, drawn not by fear or necessity, but by something gentler, a sense of gratitude. He'd check on Valor before the sun crested the hills, his breath and the horses mingling in the chill, both of them quiet, content. Emily found work in the next village but was home for dinner every night, her face flushed with satisfaction instead of stress. Charlie, notebook under his arm, spent hours at Valor's side, documenting every small triumph, every new lesson, every quiet moment of trust. And the village, too, was changed. The Red Lion regulars now lifted their pints when James walked in, the laughter at his expense replaced with genuine questions about Valor and the farm. Neighbors who'd once gossiped now stopped by the gate with baskets of eggs, fresh bread, or stories of their own stumbles and comebacks. Mr. Lister loaned his trailer without being asked. Mrs. Barnes, who'd never approved of fancy city ways, brought extra feed. Even the postman, once brisk and businesslike, lingered to scratch Valor behind the ears. One golden afternoon, a black Mercedes pulled up to the gate. Edward Sinclair, the region's best-known breeder, sharp suit and expensive boots, the kind of man who didn't notice mud, stepped out. He offered James a handshake and a contract, the figure at the bottom more than enough to clear every debt and send Emily to university. "You've done wonders with that horse," Sinclair said, flashing his famous smile. "He could be a champion in my stables. Think it over." For a moment, James felt the old anxieties stirring, that voice whispering how much easier life could be. But when he looked at Valor, standing easy with Charlie, he shook his head. "He's family, Mr. Sinclair. He stays with us." Sinclair nodded, surprised but respectful, and drove away with a wave. That night, James told the family over dinner. Emily grinned, and Charlie let out a cheer. But it was the look in Valor's eyes, a gentle contentment, a belonging that settled it. "He's not for sale," James said, voice soft. "Not at any price." As summer faded into fall, the community rallied to finish the barn, painting it together, making it warmer than it had been in decades. The harvest was slim but sweeter than any before, neighbors trading apples and stories. Emily was invited to speak at a local youth group about courage and persistence, and Charlie's essay on Valor made the village newsletter. Even James found himself offering advice to a neighbor struggling with a rescued collie, his words steadier and kinder than he'd believed himself capable of. The nights grew longer, the air crisp, and the family spent evenings on the porch, wrapped in blankets, mugs of cocoa in hand. James found himself sharing more, memories of Shadow, of Afghanistan, of mistakes and second chances. "You know," he said one night, "for a long time I thought broken meant finished. I thought we'd never get back what we lost. But Valor showed me, sometimes, broken just means you need a different kind of mending. And sometimes, it makes you stronger than you were before." Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. Charlie nestled between them, and Valor grazed quietly in the twilight, a living promise of all they'd weathered and won. "Belief beats doubt," James continued, his voice gentle. "You have to see the good in something before it can grow. That's what we did for Valor, and what he did for us." "Second chances matter," Emily added, smiling at her father. "I didn't believe it until we gave him one." "And community transforms," Charlie chimed in. "When we helped each other, everything changed." Their laughter drifted over the fields, the barn glowing golden in the distance, home now in a way it had never been before. One Sunday, the village held a harvest festival, and the Thompsons brought Valor, letting children stroke his nose and older farmers pat his scarred shoulder. Some shared their own stories, old hurts, past regrets, unlikely redemptions. James realized then, their family's struggle had become everyone's victory. Valor, once an outcast, was now a symbol, not just of survival, but of how hope can catch fire and spread. In the quiet after the festival, as dusk slipped in, James walked out to Valor's paddock, feeling the weight of the journey behind him and the peace of what lay ahead. He leaned on the fence, watching Valor graze, and let the silence speak. "You brought us back," he said, voice thick. "You mended things I thought were lost. You reminded me that nothing good is ever truly gone if you're willing to fight for it." He watched the lights flicker on in the farmhouse, laughter spilling through the windows, the barn standing proud against the gathering dark. In that moment, James knew the real prize wasn't a plaque or applause. It was the lesson burned into every scar, every late-night worry, every morning spent hoping. That belief, quiet, stubborn, unbreakable, was what saved them. So if you ever find yourself at the end of your rope, remember Valor and the Thompsons. Remember that faith can mend, community can heal, and the things that look most broken are often the ones most worth saving. And if this story touched your heart, please like and follow our channel for more true stories of hope, resilience, and the beautiful, messy journey of second chances.